to show you today how to do time-lapse photography on the Fujifilm X-T3 camera right here in Jekyll Island, home to 5 out of 7 of the world's species of sea turtles. In fact, along this beach, they're actually laying their eggs. It's an amazing place. Roll intro. I originally was going to shoot the whole thing at Jekyll Island, Georgia. The problem was there were so many sea turtles camped out laying eggs, they get disturbed with noise. And it just didn't feel right, you know, to be standing there on the beach going, "Hi, welcome to Pal to Tech." So I decided to come back to the studio. But when I got back to the studio and I was going to record the studio segment, I realized that I've got to get somewhere where there's cars and traffic and people to really test out time-lapse in those conditions. So I needed to go to a big city and shoot some city stuff at night, really demoing and showing the time-lapse photography features for the X-T3 and X-T2. So I went to Washington, D.C. Well, anyway, I'll see you in a sec. Okay, I'm here in the National Mall, Washington, D.C., testing out the Fujifilm X-T3, shooting time-lapse photography, and I'm going to start with an awesome sunset tonight, and also I can't believe I'm back. So I was in DC, I was shooting time-lapse, it was great, and I suddenly noticed 2 problems. The first was camera flicker, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the second was this weird sensor cleaning issue that kept popping up. So I thought something was wrong with the camera. Long story short, I had to get back to the studio with all my lenses and all my tools and things that I can test it in a consistent environment, because I want to report out to you everything that I noticed with time-lapse. So this is like a real-life time-lapse, back and forth. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to time-lapse backwards. We'll do a short version of the intro and we'll get right into it. And let's do the whole thing in the studio here like I normally do. How does this happen? Jekyll Island, DC, you know. Jeez. Yeah, I need more coffee. Welcome to the Pal to Tech Show. On today's episode is time-lapse photography using the Fujifilm X-T2 or X-T3. There's a few camera settings you need to make with the X-T2 or X-T3 to get it camera ready to shoot time-lapse. The first thing you need to do is turn off OIS. Flip this switch right here to the off position. The reason for this is you're going to be using a tripod and you really don't want any camera shake whatsoever, including possibility of OIS, so turn off OIS. The second thing you want to do is set the shutter to single shot. Set it to single shot right here. The next thing you want to do is go into your menu, into IQ, and set your image size. Now, here's the kicker. What you want to do is you want to set it to 16:9. The reason you want to do that is because those are the dimensions for video. For common video, frame size is 16:9. And if you set it to 16:9 in the camera, you're not going to have to deal with a lot of cropping. It will be dimensionally what it should be. The second thing is image quality. I recommend you shoot fine and raw. That way you have JPEGs and RAW. However, time-lapse is going to give you a lot of pictures and it's going to take up a lot of SD card space. So if you're on the fence about it and you're not sure, at the minimum, shoot raw. And with time-lapse, particularly with going from, you know, dark to sunrise or sunset, you're gonna need that extra latitude that raw can give you. However, if you don't have a lot of space on your SD card, or you don't want to deal with RAW, you can certainly use JPEG for time-lapse photography. In that case, if you are going to use JPEG, make sure that you put it in fine and not normal. Then RAW recording, I recommend lossless compressed. You're going to be getting a lot of these files, and for time-lapse, I think lossless compressed would be the best choice. It cuts down on the file size without any loss in image quality for your time-lapse. Okay, so there's one more setting change you need to make, and you need to disable sensor cleaning between your shots. Trust me on this one. I'll get into it in a little bit why you need to do this. You go down to the little wrench, user setting, sensor cleaning, and then make sure that both of these values are switched to off for both of them. They should both say off. Click OK. All right, so now you got your camera set up. The next thing you need to do is ask yourself the 3 big questions. Number 1, what do you want to shoot a time lapse of? You know, clouds, people, sunsets, that kind of thing. Number 2, how long do you want your final time lapse video to be? And number 3, what frame rate will your final video be? I think for starting out, you should try and shoot clouds moving. You could even test it out shooting ice melting in a glass. That's what I did. And when you know that, you got to remember this. The faster moving the subject is in your photos, the shorter the time between your shots you need to allocate for, and the slower moving, say you want to shoot the sun moving across the sky, that's slower moving than a bunch of people walking around the street. If people are walking around the street and you're shooting kind of a cityscape, you're going to want the camera to be going faster than if you're trying to shoot the sun going across the sky. Then you're going to have it a little bit slower. So it's going to be, like that, and we'll go over that. So here are the times I recommend. If you're shooting moving traffic and cars and people, I recommend 1 second interval between shots. If you're shooting moving clouds, sunsets, and sunrises, I would go for 2 to 4 seconds roughly, maybe even 5 seconds for that. If you're shooting the sun going across the sky, you might want to go for 15 to 30 seconds. So that's kind of, the rough average. And again, if you're shooting something that is going to go on for a really long time, like say a construction project, maybe 5 to 15 minutes. But in those cases, you're going to need special equipment that's outside the scope of this basic video we're going to be discussing. Another thing to remember about the time between your shots, the interval in time-lapse photography, shorter is better. You can always edit out extra images or speed up the video in post. But if you have too big of a gap between your shots, once you go and you're finished, you've left location, you go back and you're editing, you can't get that extra footage if it's jerky, you know what I mean? So I would err on the side of short duration between the shots. 1, 2 seconds. If you think it might be 5, shoot 2. You're only limited by the memory card size that you have. So the next thing is, how long is the video of your time lapse? Well, I think 10 seconds is a good length for a time-lapse video. I think 10, let's aim for 10 seconds. That's a good average. So now you have 10 seconds. That's your length. What's your final video frame rate? Video obviously has how many frames per second. For most web video, it's 30 frames a second. I know the PAL system in Europe uses 25 frames a second. However, cinema, movies, they use 24 frames a second, and I recommend that you go with 24 frames a second. Let's say you want a 10-second time lapse that you will be putting in a 24 frames per second movie. What you do is you multiply the length in seconds by the frame rate. So, I hate math, okay? I'm terrible at math, but stay with me on this one. All right, so you have 24 frames a second. That's gonna be your final movie, all right? Or 30, whatever you choose. So let's say 24 frames a second, that's your final movie, times you want a 10-second video you're making, 10-second time lapse. Okay, so 24 frames a second times 10, that's, you're gonna need to shoot 240 photos. You're multiplying your final frames per second by how many seconds your video you want it to be. So 24 times 10 gives you 240 photos. So the next question you have to ask is, well, how long do I have to sit there while the camera's taking the pictures? What's the duration? Is it an hour? Is it 30 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? How long do I have to stand there and let the camera shoot the time lapse? As I said, let's say you're shooting clouds with 5 seconds between shots. So your duration's 5 seconds. In that case, you multiply 5 seconds by that 240 photos and you get 1200. That's how many seconds it will take for the camera to finish shooting to give you a 10-second time-lapse video. I take it a step further and I divide 1200, which is the number of seconds, I divide that by 60, and that's how many minutes I have to stand there next to the camera while it's shooting. But you know what? I don't even worry about shooting time a whole lot because, for example, you don't have to in a lot of cases. If you're shooting sunsets, when the sun sets, time's over. You know what I mean? You could turn the camera off at that point. So, you don't get too hung up with this. What is the equipment needed in the field to do time-lapse? Obviously, you need a camera. Bare minimum I would recommend is 64 gigabyte memory card. I think 120 gigs would be better, but at minimum, I think 64. And I'll put links down below to the ones that I use and recommend, but that's what I suggest. I would not go 16 gig cards. Time-lapse, you're going to get a lot of pictures, 10 minutes, 5 seconds, 240 pictures. So a 64 gig card is good. The second thing I recommend equipment-wise is the battery grip. And I see YouTubers and other articles, they'll say, you know, make sure you bring extra batteries. Yeah, but you can't change the batteries when you're shooting in the middle of a time-lapse. You can't touch the camera. Once you turn that camera on, that's it. So I strongly recommend, if you have a battery grip, put it on the camera, put 2 batteries in it, plus 1 in the camera, that's 3 batteries. That should do you fine. If you don't have the battery grip, then in that case, do the best you can with what you have. And remember, when it's cold outside, it's going to chew through batteries even faster. Okay, if you're shooting anything involving the sun, such as a sunset, sunrise, etc., make sure you get yourself an app for your phone that shows you where the sun will appear. Lastly, you want to use a wide-angle lens, such as a 16mm. And the reason for that is with time-lapse photography, you want to have as much of the scenery in the frame as possible. That way you can see the clouds moving in different areas and things like that. Plus, it gives you latitude when you're editing it in video to kind of zoom in and pull out and make those effects. So you don't want a tight crop. You don't want a zoom lens zoomed all the way in. You want to use as wide an angle lens as you possibly can. And one more item that you must have for gear is a tripod, and a sturdy tripod. Actually, not one of these. This is a really nice travel tripod. I love this tripod. However, for time-lapse photography, the older, bigger, clunkier, heavier, old school tripods are best. You want something that's rock solid. In the case of this one, you know, I was actually able to hang something from this little hook right here. This type of lightweight travel tripod is not a good idea for time-lapse if you can avoid it. If that's the only one you have, that's the only one you have, and that was the case with me. But if you have a huge old clunky, heavy as heck tripod laying around, that's the one you want. Any movement at all is going to screw up your shot. It's got to be drop dead still. We're going to have some special tips for beaches and sunsets and sunrises, and I learned these tips when I was in Jekyll Island, Georgia. First off, things move very quickly when you're on a beach shooting a sunrise. Very quickly. The sun starts coming up and you just don't have time, so get there early, get your stuff. I mean, get there 45 minutes before that sun is supposed to get up there. That's minimum. The second thing is shoot slightly underexposed, because once that sun comes up, everything gets real bright real fast. The other thing is one that I really found out. Wear clothes that have a lot of pockets. You know, when you're on the beach, there's nowhere to put anything, and the last thing you want to do is put little things like lens filters or batteries. You don't want to put them on the sand. You need clothes that have a lot of pockets for the beach. And then watch for changing tides, okay? Don't set your time-lapse up too close to the ocean. On one hand, you want to be as close as you can to the ocean because you don't want people who might be walking along the beach to walk in front of your shot. So if you're close to the ocean, hopefully they'll go behind you. But if you're too close to the ocean and the tides are coming in, halfway through your time-lapse, you're going to get your camera smacked with water. Not good. All right, you're at your location. You've got your camera on your tripod. You are all ready. The sun is about to come up. You're ready to go. What you need to do now is start your time-lapse process. And what you do is you go into your menu and you go up to the camera, interval, timer, shooting, right there. And the first menu item right here is the most important. That's the one where you set the interval, the time between the shots. I'm going to say every 3 seconds. So you set it right here. The next one, just leave on the infinity icon right here. Don't put it a number at all, okay? You will tell the camera when the camera's finished. That's all this means. So you don't want to tell the camera in advance how many to take and then to stop taking them. You might want to have them longer, and since you're going to be standing there anyway with the camera or nearby, you'll just turn the camera off when it's done. So always leave it on infinity. Don't worry about this one, and then the next one over. And what you're doing is you're using the menu to go here and then press it again. You get this screen. This is the start waiting time. I just started immediately, but you could set it to start, 10 minutes from now, that kind of thing. Sometimes if you're in a hotel, say, and you want to shoot some time lapse in the middle of the night, you can get this set up to start, 2 hours after you go to bed. Kind of cool. You aim it out the window at night. But for the most part, you can just say 0, and the minute you press the menu OK button, the camera is going to start the time-lapse process, okay? Now, remember I told you earlier about turning off the sensor cleaning feature. Here's what happened. I was in Washington, D.C. I was set up, and I had about 11 to 12 seconds duration between time-lapse shots. And what I noticed with the Fujifilm X-T3 was that after a certain period of time of the duration, the camera shuts off. The camera actually turns off. So I think it was roughly between 8 and 10 seconds. So if your duration between your time-lapse shots is between 8 and 10 seconds, the camera will actually turn off and then turn back on to take the next time-lapse shot. But the problem is if your duration is, say, 12 seconds, and the camera turns off at 10 seconds, it's also doing a sensor clean. And I didn't see it was really going off. What was happening was the camera was, let me show you some video. I was watching it. It would go into sensor cleaning mode. While I was testing ice melting, it was going into sensor cleaning mode. And I thought there must be something wrong. Why is this camera going into sensor cleaning mode? And I realized it's because the camera was turning off and then coming back on so quickly that I didn't really catch that it was even turning off. It was just going into sensor cleaning mode and then take another time lapse and then sensor cleaning mode and then take another time lapse and sensor cleaning mode and then say that 6 times fast. I thought it was broken. So anyway, don't go through my pain. Turn off that sensor cleaning thing when you're doing your time lapse, and then you can turn it back on again when you're done. I need to talk to you now about flicker because that is the biggest challenge with any time-lapse photography. Have a look here. I shot this, there it is in DC. Do you see it flickering? Look at that. Look at the sky. Okay, look at the sky. And it's like, it doesn't look good. Flicker is a real problem for time-lapse photography. Now there's 3 types of time-lapse flicker. There's aperture flicker, shutter flicker, and camera exposure setting change flicker. All right, let's deal with all 3 of these. Aperture flicker, this is the most interesting one of all. So, when you shoot time-lapse photography, you want your camera to be completely in manual mode. So here's the thing about aperture flicker. Even if you manually set the aperture on your camera to say f8, every time the camera takes a picture, it goes, right? But when it comes back to do another one, it doesn't always perfectly, scientifically, structurally exactly stop at f8. Sometimes it's f7.99999, other times it's f8.01, right? And when you're taking still pictures, you don't notice this, but time-lapse is so picky that unless it's f8 and always f8 every single time, not 7.9 and not 8.1, but f8, 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 or f5.6 or f11 or f whatever, if it's not like that, that's what causes the flicker, because it's just letting in just a little bit more light, just a little bit or a little bit less. And so that's the problem. So the solution to this is to use a manual lens, not a Fuji lens, but a manual lens that goes on the Fuji camera that the Fuji camera is not communicating with. And you set the f-stop on the manual lens to say f8, and then it stays at f8. And because the camera is not talking to the lens at all. So that is a really good solution. If you have a manual lens that's not Fuji, use that for time-lapse. If you only have Fujinon lenses with this camera, then what I recommend, there's 2 things you can do. First, don't shoot with a smaller aperture than f8. So the wider the aperture you go with, the better. But remember, the wider the aperture, the less stuff in frame will be in focus. So you've got to balance that out. I would say a nice rough average for you would be tried at f5.6, okay? So again, don't do it over f8 or you will see that flicker. Okay, so the second thing you can do is a kind of a thing called lens twisting. And what lens twisting is, it's actually disconnecting the lens from the camera just a little bit so that the lens is still on, and still able to work, right? Just able to focus and take the shot. But what you do is it disconnects it. So you hold down this button right here and you turn the lens, that's it, just a little bit of a turn. And what happens is it goes 0. You see that? Here, I'll turn the lens again. There, now it's on. You see now Fuji's talking to the lens. But if I hold down the button and I turn it just a little bit, there, okay? Now I've tried this with different Fujinon lenses, and some lenses it just will not work with. For example, the 90mm, it will not work. However, I did notice it worked okay with a 35mm. That is an option you can try. Don't try that on your only shoot in Iceland. You know, do it at home first, test it out. But those would be your two options. Once again, don't go any smaller than f8 and try the lens twist method. Okay, I'm going to show you a demo that I took with this lens right here, the Fujinon 35mm 2.0 prime. Both images, as you can see right here, were shot with this lens. Same duration, same lighting, same everything. However, the only difference between the two was on one of them, I had the lens fully connected. On the other one, I did the twist method. So have a look at this. And as you can see, look at that. You see the flickering? You see the flickering right there? Clear as day. The image on the left is disconnected from the camera. The image on the right had a firm manual set f-stop to it. Doesn't matter, I still got flicker from that variation that I explained to you. So try it out. However, if it's not working for you, I strongly recommend at the very least, try it anyway, shooting with a minimum aperture of f8. Okay, the second type of flicker that you're going to get is called shutter flicker. So generally, the higher the shutter speed, the less accurate the camera is at having the exact same exposure between identical shots. So you want to shoot with as slow a shutter speed as possible. And the third kind of problem that can lead to flicker is camera exposure flicker. That's easy to fix. You must shoot in all manual mode all the time. Okay, now, there's one major gotcha here. Automatic white balance. You need to turn that off so the camera is not looking and trying to adjust the white balance. You just go into here, white balance, into here, and make sure that white balance is not set to auto. Do not set it to auto. Set it to one of the other ones. Make a custom one or choose something else. But if it's in auto, you're going to increase the likelihood of having differences between the shots. A handy way to think of all this, okay, is, and I just made this up just now, to make flicker go away, stay away from the A, right? Okay, we have poetry here on Palette Tech. To make flicker go away, stay away from the A, meaning don't have an A on the top, don't have an A here, don't have an A here. It needs to be in all manual mode, no A, no automatic. Okay, once you're all finished shooting your time lapse, you need to get those photos off your SD card and onto your computer, probably Lightroom, since most of you are using that, so we're going to go with that right now. You bring them into Lightroom, simply import them in. You'll see them all appear here. Now, particularly if you're using RAW files, you can edit them and kind of bring up the exposure and do whatever you want. It's kind of a nice thing about shooting RAW. You get a lot more latitude than JPEG. I recommend, if you're shooting a sunrise or a sunset, to pick a photo in the middle of the bunch to do your edits to. And the reason why is because if you pick the first one, the light changes so much, you kind of want to average that out. So I pick like right in the middle, boom, the middle shot right here, kind of, you know, halfway between the beginning of the event and the end of the event. Boom, I go into the develop module, here it is. You know, you can edit the picture, you can bring up your exposure, you know, dehaze a little bit, whatever you want to do. Get it set, and once you're done with that, then you're going to copy the settings from this one photo to your others. Very simple to do. You select this photo right here, as you can see down here, and then what I do is I then, once it's selected, I go all the way to the beginning, hold down the shift key, and click the very first picture. So it selects all these photos. You see that? And then I copy the settings from the one photo I was just working on to all of those photos just before it. And the way you do that is you click the sync button, and basically I would check all of these and I would click synchronize. The only thing you need to be careful of is if you do any spot adjustments with the adjustment brush, make sure that you turn that off, and then just click synchronize, and it will go ahead and synchronize the edits that you made to that one photo to all the other photos. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you have that picture you were editing selected. You then go to the front end of it and then select all these by holding down Shift, clicking sync. Up comes this dialog box, and then go ahead and click on synchronize. Once you have all your photos looking like you like them, you need to export them. Command A or Control A, select them all, and then I simply right click, export. So you're going to export to your hard drive. We'll just put it on the desktop. We'll call it, I don't know, demo time-lapse. Okay, so what's important here is I like to tick the rename checkbox and select file name sequence. That way it will put a number, a numerical number after each photo in sequential order. You're going to need that if you're going to edit these and turn them into a video from Photoshop. Okay, so the image format can be JPEG. However, if you choose TIFF, what's nice is you can select 16 to 8-bit, choose 16-bit for video, and you'll get a slightly higher quality. But for most of you, go ahead and select JPEG, sRGB color space, sharpen for screen, standard is fine. You know, you can decide if you want to remove or include the metadata, and then that's it, and you click export. At that point, you're going to have all of your photos ready to go as JPEGs, and at this point, you need to stitch them together into a movie. There's two ways, well, there's a lot of ways to do it. The first way is to use Photoshop. I don't like using Photoshop for this. I found that it's kind of clunky, so I don't use it, but I'm going to show you a real fast way to do it in case Photoshop is all you have. So with Photoshop open, you go to File, Open, and you browse to where you have your photos. And remember when I told you wanted to have them in sequential order? This is why. You click on the very first one in the sequence, you click the options, and you tick the box that says Image Sequence. That's all you got to do. Photoshop, as long as you have them in sequential numbering, Photoshop will put them in order. So click on Open, and what it's going to ask you for is the frame rate. Choose 24 for the most cinematic frame rate, or 30 if that's what you want to do. I choose 24, click OK, and here it is. And you'll see you have that kind of this video display at the bottom. If you don't see that, go to Window, Workspace, Motion. Got it? Window, Workspace, Motion. Go there if you don't see these items down below. So to export it out into a video that you could share, you simply go to File, Export, Render Video. In the Render Video dialog box, you need to be sure that Adobe Media Encoder is selected, not Photoshop Image Sequence. Don't do that. Adobe Media Encoder. Keep all the defaults if you want, although here you can select if you want it to be 2K or 1080. I would say starting off, if you're using Photoshop for this sort of thing, choose 1080, that's fine. HDV 1080, H264, high quality presets, fine. And then you simply, can name it, my final time lapse, right? It's going to be an MP4 file. You click on render, and Photoshop is now going to process the video. Go get a cup of coffee or something. It takes a while sometimes. Once it's all done, you will have your MP4 file, which will then play, as you can see. Yeah, and this one has that flicker issue I told you about. But that's how you can get it out of Photoshop. I don't like to use Photoshop because it doesn't have a lot of options. So another option is to purchase a piece of software called LR Time-Lapse, which is a plugin for Lightroom. Very cool piece of software. Again, beyond the scope of this video to show you how it works and all of that, but take a look at the site. Any video editor should be able to handle time-lapse sequence of photos on the timeline. I can't show you every single video editor. I'm just going to show you the one that I love and use, Final Cut Pro. You open up Final Cut Pro, and you create, say, a new project. Okay, so name your project. I like to choose 4K, but if you don't want a video that high, you can choose 1080. 1080p right there. That'd give you 1920 by 1080. I'm going to go ahead and choose 4K. Click OK. You have an empty project. Now you're going to import by clicking the import button right here, navigating to where you had it, There it is. Here's all your pictures. So you need to select all your pictures. You're going to be bringing them all into Final Cut Pro. Bring them in. Okay, once you've brought them in, you will see each individual picture here. What I like to do is Command A, select all of them, all of the pictures, drag them all and drop them right on the timeline. Just that simple. Once you've done that, they will already be selected. If they are not already selected, make sure you select all of them by doing Command A. Then you want to go and double click, double click the time area right here. Just click, click. See, it turns purple. Then press the 1 key on your keyboard. 1. What you're doing is you're setting each photo to be 1 frame. Press return. Boom. You see that? Let me do that again, okay? Select all the photos. Go up to the time area here, right here. While the photos are selected, double click on it. Click, click. Double click on it. Then press the 1 key on your keyboard. 1, the number 1. Boom. So it's like that. Then press return like that. You will see these are all your pictures right here. See that? And you can go through them. Now if you hit play, there you are. There's your movie. And you can take it a step further. If you want to zoom in and kind of do like fake motion, you can select all of these, right click, new compound clip, and create it into what's called a compound clip. So once it's selected, you can apply kind of a panning out kind of cool thing. So you go into the crop area right here, choose Ken Burns, and you know, we can start maybe right at the Lincoln Memorial right there. We'll finish maybe where this is right here, and then simply click done. Then it creates the right keyframes. Now watch what happens when we play it back. So now you have motion in your time-lapse without buying, you know, a $10,000 motion control system, but I'll have a link below. So anyway, that's how that works, and then you would simply export it. And you can do things like change the duration, speed up the clip, slow it down, and so on and so forth. That's how I did the sunrise clip in the beginning of this video. Okay, here are my tips and strategies to get the best time-lapse photos that you possibly can. Number 1, plan ahead and arrive early. You know, before going to Iceland, shoot a time-lapse and back at home. Do a test, okay? Very, very, very important you do that. Check the weather, check the location of the sun. Use an app, right, that shows you where the sun's gonna be. Get to your location at least 45 minutes in advance. Get there early and be prepared, okay? You know, let's take that example of Iceland. It may, you know, you may be in Iceland for 3 days, but if you're trying to shoot that amazing sunrise, you've really only got 20 minutes times 3 to get that. That's an hour. So the entire trip of going to Iceland, you got 1 hour to try and get a good time lapse of the sunrise. So, you know, make sure you have a large SD card, minimum 64 gigs. Best would be 128 gigs. Also, framing is more important in time-lapse than ever. Walk around the area before you just plop the camera down on the tripod. Get down low, look up high, look what's in your foreground. Be aware that, you know, are you on a path where people might be walking by? Plan it out. Sturdy tripod, as I said before, the heavier the better. There cannot be any camera shake whatsoever. Use that battery grip. Time-lapse, choose through batteries. Manual wide-angle lens would be best. If you don't have that, then use a wide angle. Set your image size to 16:9. That is the aspect ratio that you want. Set everything to manual. That includes white balance. Use the lowest ISO that you can. Get with the widest aperture you can. Don't go smaller than f8. Your shutter speed, now remember this, your shutter speed should be at least half the length of the interval that you're shooting, and with some room for the shot to finish before the next image needs to be taken. Say you're shooting with 1 second between shots, and you set your shutter speed for 2 seconds. That won't work. But even if you set it for 3/4 of a second or half a second, you're cutting it close. So remember, it's really important, okay? Shutter speed needs to be at least half the length of the interval and with some room for the shot to finish before the next image needs to be taken. Turn off sensor cleaning, okay? We talked about this turn that thing off. This stumped me for weeks, for at least 2 weeks. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Use an ND filter. You might want to get yourself an ND filter. This will allow you to drag the shutter by choosing a wider aperture. So if you're outside in the bright sun, okay, you want a wide aperture and you want a slow shutter speed. So your only choice at this point, if you've gone as low as you can with your ISO, your only choice now is to use an ND filter. So definitely you'll get a more cinematic, softer look. Aim for about 1/4 to 1/2 second in broad daylight, but you're going to have that ND filter. Turn off image stabilization on the lens. Once again, very important. All time-lapse is done on a tripod, so no need to have OIS turned on. Check your settings, then check them again, then check them again. And by the way, check them again, okay? Listen, I forgot the camera was in the wrong format, 16:9. I forgot to have OIS turned off. I forgot to have one of I think it was the shutter speed was in automatic. Once you start the time-lapse process and that sun comes up, you don't get a do-over, okay? Unless you want to come back the next day. Measure twice, cut once. I'm gonna give you a bonus tip. If you have another camera with you, even a different brand or whatever, even a small little point and shoot, bring it. Use multiple cameras because you're just going to be standing there while the camera's going. You may as well use that time to get some really nice still shots, okay? So it gives you something to do, and it's also a great fallback in case your time-lapse doesn't come out, okay? So if your time-lapse doesn't come out, it's, you know, hey, well, at least you got some really nice pictures of locations. So bring multiple cameras if you can. Photography is all about capturing the moment. And time-lapse, what's just so incredible about time-lapse is that time-lapse captures all the little moments and then brings them together into one big moment. And if you do it right, the whole will always be greater than the sum of the parts. So give time-lapse a try. I have my links below. As always, it has been awesome talking to you, and I can't wait to see you around this electronic campfire again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.